Welcome to the Piedmont Triad Podcast.
Before I get too old, I'm gonna head down to Muscle Shoals. Baby, you can meet me at the station.
Welcome to another episode of the Piedmont Triad Podcast, where we talk about the strange and unusual aspects and people of the Piedmont Triad area of North Carolina. I'm your host, David Locklear, and today on this episode, we are talking with multi-talented artist, musician, and trans woman Geddi Monroe. Geddi and I met randomly a few years ago at the Orange Peel Music Club in Asheville when we were both doing live photography coverage for the live performance of a cult rock band Uncle Acid and the Deadbeats, and Geddi was kind enough to help me when I was having a problem with my camera. In addition to photography, Geddi also publishes Shape of the Crowd, a music magazine dedicated to the underground Asheville music scene. Geddi is also a performing musician in the band Machine 13, as well as her solo project called Juniper Willow. On this episode, Geddi chats with us about the challenges of being out as a trans woman, using these unique struggles to create art in various mediums, and the happiness of finally being who she always wanted to be. Anyway, well, I appreciate you chatting with me, Geddi. So this is partially going to be something of an education for me, just so you know. I was sort of familiar that you became trans since the time I had met you. And again, yeah. I don't even know if that's the proper terminology, becoming or being or any of that kind of stuff. So I was wanting to clear it with you to make sure that you'd be okay talking about that just a little bit. It won't be in depth, but I thought it might at least give some idea about where you're coming from, if you're okay with that.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, if we end up mentioning my music at all, it's a pretty big part of it, so might as well.
Oh, yeah. Well, see, and that was something that I wanted to talk to you about as well, because I only really knew you as a photographer. So to find out, you were also a musician didn't really surprise me, yet at the same time, it kind of did. So, what kind of music is it that you actually perform? Because I didn't have a chance to listen.
So there's a band I'm in as part of the live act called Machine 13. That's with my friend Hamish, Greg, and Will. We all do industrial electronic stuff. Hamish does most of the songwriting. He's very inspired by acts like Nine Inch Nails. I personally have a solo act called Juniper Willow that has an EP I'll be announcing today. It'll come out the 17th. And that is also an electronic project, but it's a lot more influenced by acts like Crystal Castles, a lot more like four on the floor kind of dance stuff with a lot of like harshness and screaming in the vocals, etc.
Oh, okay. There is something to be said for a marriage of those two things, because I think industrial shows are awesome, but if you kind of want to chill out, that's not really a good spot to do it. You're going to get hit. Yeah. Well, I'll just give a little bit of background. I'm going to go ahead and let everybody know that the way that you and I met was actually very cool. It was a good memory for me because we were both attending the Uncle Acid and the Deadbeats show at the Orange Peel in Asheville a few years ago. And I had gotten a Airbnb nearby so I wouldn't have to drive afterwards, because I knew it would not be in any shape to drive. And but I unfortunately left my backup battery at the Airbnb, and so my battery and my camera was on its last legs, and you were in the pit taking pictures, and we got to chatting, and then I was like, well, all right, man, it was good to meet you, but I have to go get another battery or I'm not going to be able to take pictures. And it turns out you had a backup, and you kind of saved my bacon, as it were, and I was able to get the pictures, and it was it was a really big help. It was a good connection I felt like we made, and so we kind of kept in touch on Instagram from time to time, and I was always looking at the pictures that you took, because you really focus on the pictures in the Asheville music scene, and it very much the underground scene. It seems to be what you're focused on. So, tell me about how that got started. What was the history that led you up to our fortuitous meeting that evening, with your photography and background and whatnot.
Yeah, at the time, we met March 8th, 2019, and that was actually the first live music event that I had photographed. I was a student at UNCA studying art, but not photography. And I was in a photography class, and I had always, had this good relationship with like music entering my art. But I wasn't like enough of an active participant in music culture, I felt. And also I was just saying to myself, thinking, daydreaming when I should have been paying attention in a humanities class about like, there's show photographers. Like, how do they do that? What's the harm in just asking? Mm-hmm. I was probably 21 at the oldest at the time, for sure. And so I opened up the Orange Peel website in class and scrolled through all their shows coming up and found the Uncle Acid one because I liked them and decided to say, all right, like, let's just stalk this band and see who manages it, who can I talk to? And one thing led to another, and just by asking, I was able to get in with a photographer pass. And wasn't paid or anything like that, hobbyist stuff, like first time learning experience, yada, yada. But once I had done that, I guess the Asheville DIY scene could be kind of insular at the time, and I think it still is. That's one of the few criticisms I would give to it. It's a little hard to get into unless you quote unquote know somebody. But once I had those photos of Uncle Acid and the Deadbeats, as well as Twin Temple and Graveyard, I was able to kind of have a little bit of a portfolio with live music. It wasn't until way later in October that finally I ended up bumping into a band on social media called Tongues of Fire, who are very active in the Asheville DIY scene. And I asked if I could take photos for them, or maybe they asked me to take photos. I don't know which happened, but next thing I knew, I was at Static Age October 12th taking photos of Tongues of Fire. And the good story there is that I was such a nervous photographer, and I'd never really done anything like that. And I cared so much, and I was so stressed out that my SD card was going to corrupt or something was going to go wrong, that like as soon as Tongues of Fire got done as openers, I ran home and uploaded all the photos just to make sure that they were all okay. Once I had them on my desktop, I was like, all right, well, it's like 11 p.m. Like, I don't really know what else to do. I guess I'm going to go back to the show. So I go back to Static Age, and I took a photo that I'll go ahead and send to you of a band that I'd never seen before called Baghead. And they had this insane stage presence. They wore bags on their head, these like burlap, like sackcloth, black and gold kind of bags. Every single member of the band, it was like this hard rock, but like Turkish influence kind of sound, was wearing these bags. They're like performing anonymously. And the lead person gets up and climbs up into the audience, and they end up doing a crowd surf, which is something that I've rarely ever seen at DIY shows like Static Age here in Asheville.
Yeah.
And everything just lined up, and without asking permission or anything, I took a photo, and it came out fantastic, and I ended up sending it to him. And years later, just all the people that I met, that band had 6 members that were all so talented and connected to other bands. And I met so many people through that and started working for them for a while. And one thing led to another. And now years later, I'm actually in a band with the former members of Baghead. So that's just where everything started, just hooked in right there that night.
Isn't it funny how life will just take you in the most unusual directions?
Yeah, I'm glad that I really wonder how different my life would be if after uploading all those photos to my desktop, I didn't say, well, I guess I'll just go back for no reason.
Yeah, it's so weird to think about those tiny little decisions that make such a big difference that you look back on and going, wow, if I hadn't done that, I have no idea where I'd be right now. I mean, chances are you'd be in a good place, but still, it's just interesting how things can evolve.
Yeah, I have so much to be thankful for that I'm involved in right now that I believe were the consequences of so few like split-second decisions that it's hard for me to have any regrets anytime I sit around and start thinking, if I'd done this or that. It's like I would be too afraid to lose where I'm at right now if everything hadn't lined up just the way it had.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and speaking of Static Age, that's actually one of my favorite record stores to go to whenever I hit Asheville. That place is just, it's exactly what it needs to be.
Yeah, it's been through a lot of kind of evolution of the live space since I've been going there. Post COVID, it used to have all these like theater seats up in it, which is what I climbed up into to take like an overhead shot of the photo I was talking about earlier. But they got rid of all the theater seats to make more space for the live music section, because I feel like that's kind of what they've become really known for, is being a live music venue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for me, it was like watching them going from this really cool underground metal and rock CD store to this really obscure vinyl store with a giant music club in the back. And it's just, it's wonderful. It's like, you know, they've got beer, they got music and live music. I could camp out there for days if I was allowed.
Yeah, that's like, I sit around and I think, like, one day, hopefully I live long enough to see myself retire and I have the financial stability to retire. God, I hope. It's like, what would I actually want when I'm older? You know, like when I'm really just, I'm done. I'm ready to kind of make a nest for myself. And I think that Static Age, you know, the owner, I think they've just got it all figured out. Having a record store, live music venue, selling alcohol, helping foster the scene, all that stuff. It's like, God, what more could you ask for as like a punk rocker to have at your disposal?
It's like that is really, as a punk rocker, getting, you know, to have your cake and eat it too. You just get the best of both worlds.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, man, okay, so that's pretty cool. I mean, I understand where you're talking about the idea that you were jumping around in the seats around the stage in order to get good pictures. I think a lot of people don't appreciate when, even if you're not a professional photographer, you're still doing some fairly gonzo things in order to get the camera just right so you're taking a decent picture. And ever since I've started doing that, even though I don't really make any money at it, I really appreciate the pictures I see in a magazine now, because I'm like, yeah, some guy was getting slammed into, and he was probably getting pawed at by an audience member. It's like, yeah, this guy earned this picture. Good for him.
Yeah. I mean, every aspect of it does come with some difficulty. Not only is it tough to, like I was talking about earlier, get that kind of in to start to find your place and the space and time to make this work and talk to the right people to have the opportunity. But also, like, when you're there, it's almost like kind of an athletic event of getting knocked around in a rowdy crowd, of understanding how to physically work around people in tough conditions. I'd say it's just as hard of a skill to learn to move through a crowd delicately and politely while still getting your shot in mosh pits, or when crowds are completely stiff and you just don't want to disturb the space. You know, it's making sure that you're not detracting from the show with what you're doing.
Yeah.
Let alone just all the other camera skills of just being a good photographer while everything is in motion and you're working under some of the most challenging lighting that is presented to photographers in the craft, especially when you have no control over it.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. I remember when I went and saw the band A Perfect Circle at Carolina Rebellion years ago, and I was really excited about shooting pictures of them, but of course they have the, you know, first 3 songs no flash rule, and It was at night, and the first 3 songs were pretty much under cover of darkness with like a little bit of yellow light popping in from time to time.
Yeah.
And even my good pictures were garbage.
Yeah, I even saw that with Uncle Acid. I mean, the other bands, especially Graveyard, were playing in quite a bit of light, but Uncle Acid was like completely backlit. Like, I guess you got a bunch of grainy silhouette photos that are okay at best.
Yeah, that's about all you can hope for.
I guess. Yeah.
Well, tell me about how your band, Juniper Willow. Now, that you say that's the band name. Now, is that also the name that you've taken as well, or is it like strictly an artistic identity?
I would say right now it's kind of an artistic identity. So, kind of getting into my transgender identity. The name Juniper Willow has kind of been something that even way before I came to understand my gender identity, the name Juniper Willow is something that kind of came to me from a really young age. I didn't know what it meant or where it came from. It might have been something I misheard one day, but for some reason I like really, really held on to it for a decade of my youth. And as 2020 rolled around, I, like a lot of people, had a good bit of time to do some introspection. And I kind of knew there was something going on with my gender. And Juniper Willow was a name that I started to kind of experiment with, you know, behind closed doors and with people that were close to me. to see if I could get comfortable with it or start to kind of explore this. And through that, I started to ask myself, because I had all these self-image and self-esteem issues and such. I started to ask myself, like, what would be the ideal thing that I want to be? Who do I want to become if I am unhappy with who I am? And I thought that person needed a name, so Juniper Willow was the natural one to assign to it. Mm-hmm. After 2020 had come to pass and 2021 comes around, I went through kind of a difficult moment in my life where I graduated from school. I lost some people in my daily life that were pretty integral to making my life what it was. I tumbled through a couple of different jobs, and, you know, the economy was crazy around then. And I found myself at some point kind of flat on my ass, where it's like, I now live a life where no one else is going to be able to define me. No school or regimen or whatever work schedule is going to be able to kind of give me direction. So I have to figure out what I want for myself. And the more I started asking who Juniper Willow was, the more she came to look like me. So I thought of Juniper Willow as this person who, you know, does the live music photography. I didn't think of her as a musician until later, but it just sort of came. It was just the idea of someone who was confident and proud of her femininity and uncompromising on who she is. And with that kind of idea in my head as a guide of where to go and help me make my decisions and find pride in myself, it started to come natural that I became that person, because that person was me all along. So when I started picking up music and I was writing lyrics that were just so incredibly personal and full of anger and pain and all that, I thought, you know, what better to do than, you know, I feel like I'm speaking from as honest as I can possibly be. Might as well go ahead and assign this voice to that idea of Juniper Willow that has guided me for this long.
Mm-hmm. Well, that was going to actually be my follow-up was, you know, does Juniper Willow allow you to exercise some of these struggles that you're having? So obviously it's been a big help, it sounds like.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, it's funny because I say that, and this is true, I've become so much happier of a person since kind of accepting myself and letting myself show through. And transitioning has obviously been a big part of that. But it kind of just feels like my failure to accept my gender identity earlier on was really just lumped in with a whole bunch of things I wasn't accepting about myself. And now that I have turned over and accepted these things about myself, I'm so much happier. And it's funny that I am so much happier because so many of my songs are so angry. But I think I spend so much time in my daily life enjoying who I've become and the relationships I've built and the things that I get to do. And I do still have, you know, anger of the world and of things I've experienced and all that I don't really make as much time for in my personal life because I'm trying to enjoy myself. But Juniper Willow allows me to do something fun and creative while expressing that side of myself that I rarely kind of let out, that frustration.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, and I've always said this because I'm an existing member of the metal community, but I've always found that, you know, metal, punk, hard rock, hardcore, any variation of this sort of extreme rock and roll, 99% of the time, they are the most mellow and relaxed people you'll ever meet. And I've always argued it's because we're not stewing in it. It's like we're releasing it. And even as a listener, you're releasing some frustration and anger. And so it's like, yeah, you're going to be a little mellower because you're not letting that shit metastasize like a lot of other people do.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's a great outlet. Like, I never, like, scream in my personal life, except for, like, a few times in traffic because Asheville's pretty bad. But, like, I got to say, like, you know, if I'm carrying frustration throughout the week, it's just nice to, like, go record a song, or I have a live show. I get up there with a microphone and I scream for 20 or 30 minutes in front of an audience. I'm just giving it all I've got and going hoarse. And you get off stage and you're like, yeah, I'm pretty good for the week. I think I got that out of my system.
You walk over and, wow, this beverage is just simply tasty. I've never noticed how good Pepsi can be.
So it's like a great weight has been lifted from me. I wonder why.
So the music has been really beneficial for you and really kind of helped you. Now, since you've come out as trans, have you really, and is that saying it correctly? Just saying coming out as trans, or is there a better way of
Yeah.
phrasing that?
No, that's good. I mean, that's what I did. It's not what
Okay.
everybody does, but that's what I did. I definitely came out. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I wanted to make sure. Yeah, because I'm still trying to familiarize myself with all of this. And so one of the things I would like to know is that since you have come out, have you run into any kind of resistance, or has people been more supportive than you expected?
Things are interesting with that. Yeah, a lot of my family has been kind of rough about it, but that is what it is.
Right.
I guess also, I mean, whatever. It's more fuel for whatever lyrics you're gonna write, I guess, at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've kind of forged a family of my own with the live music scene and friends I have. As cheesy as that sounds, I mean, they really are all I need. I would say, pretty much everybody in my personal life that I care about was pretty supportive. A lot of people definitely didn't understand. There's kind of a phenomenon you run into where transgender people are such a small minority that, unfortunately, a lot of the time, some of your closer friends will have never actually met or have knowingly met a transgender person. So you're their first experience. And I appreciate people, taking the time to get to learn and know me and all that. But there's definitely, a lot of there's a lot of stuff to work out. It's for sure a learning process, and it's not always easy. Being a bit of, you start to feel like a little bit of a case study when so many of your friends are, asking so many questions, and there's so much catch up and all that. And people don't necessarily know manners and ethics of how to go about things. But you just gotta take a deep breath. That's what it is. And I'm just grateful that people are making the attempts to understand and don't have hatred versus, the stuff I run into. Unfortunately, from strangers, things have definitely gotten a lot more difficult. There's a lot of places where I'm not treated super well wherever I go, but also it's kind of helped strengthen this feeling of understanding where I feel welcome. I go into DIY venues here in Asheville, like Fleetwood's or the Auditorium, things like that, or just going to band practice or being among certain friends. It's nice because I can get this sense of feeling that I am wanted in a place and that what I am is not just welcome but celebrated. So it's definitely a shame that not everybody is on board, and some people will treat you very, very poorly for something that doesn't affect them. But at least I know who my friends are, and I know where I feel safe.
Yeah, so you were saying that one of the things that you kind of run into is you don't want to be sort of like a case study for people. And I've often wondered that when you meet new people and they do find out about your transgender identity, I've often thought that you would have to be sort of aware of the idea that you might be brought on as sort of, for a lack of a better phrase, like the minority friend on some level. And, how do you deal with that? Do you just kind of wait to get sort of certain ideas from the person, or, is that something that you've ever thought of? I'm familiarizing myself, so I'm going to ask you questions just like you said everybody else does.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, when I'm meeting new people, I just sort of feel things out. I've had interactions. See, I as a trans woman, I would say, and there's this concept called pathing, and it's the idea of can someone tell you're trans, or do they think you're a cisgendered person? And there's so many ugly conversations around that. But at the end of the day, I don't really feel the pressure to quote unquote pass. I just kind of want to be myself and who I am. So because of my appearance, sometimes, or a lot of the time, people tend to assume that I am male, or they might not make the assumption that I am female. So that's usually the big thing that I run into is I usually have to initially correct someone, or I can see that someone is understanding that there's something queer or non-binary about me, and they're trying to delicately navigate it. Well, that's one of the tougher things about interacting with people that are allies and are on your side, is that sometimes it's weird to kind of feel like the thing that you are is something that makes people walk on eggshells. But I just know that, unfortunately, it's not people's fault. That's the fault of a very unfortunate and delicate political climate and people's recognition that the experience that I have every day is kind of to go through a not very fun turn of events at almost every minor interaction I have. And then they just don't want to be another thing that contributes to that. So, it's something that you kind of just start to grow a skin for after a while. And, things change as people get further along in their transition. Some people, through hormone replacement therapy and makeup and wardrobe and et cetera, start to present themselves in a way that I guess, quote unquote, passes more. Even if that's not necessarily my goal or the intention, sometimes just naturally things progress and you face that confusion and that kind of treatment a little bit differently, which is funny because it's kind of like you're taking on a cisgendered privilege,
Oh, yeah. I hadn't even thought about it that way, but yeah, that makes Well, I'm glad to hear that you're happy because that's a big, big plus because to tell you the truth, the only thing that you seem to hear in a lot of media outlets is, there's always some sort of a percentage quote of transgender people who, after they went through their transition, were depressed and suicidal and whatnot. And I'm sure that there's validity to that. But the thing is that it's very rare to hear people's stories like you where you're like, no, I'm happy. I found my tribe.
Yeah, well, part of it is the privilege that I have for sure. I mean, if you on a demographic level, I went from outwardly presenting as a white man, which is arguably one of the most privileged positions you can be in socially, to being one of the by population smallest minorities that exists. And unfortunately, my existence kind of gets debated in American politics, week by week. But the kind of thing that you pull from your experiences there is that I would say that for me personally in my own daily life, my life improved drastically by accepting who I am. But on the outside, my life got a little bit more difficult for sure as regular interactions with other people started to become much more difficult. I would say that a lot of the issues that trans people face and the reason there are, difficult statistics and issues with mental health and all that do come from kind of an unsupportive, I guess, society. When I say that I still have privilege with who I am, I have the privilege of being an adult who is financially independent and lives in a city that is generally on the more accepting side of things in comparison to other places in the country. Whereas a lot of transgender people are, young and still living with their parents who might not approve, or they rely financially on other people that have a power dynamic over them, et cetera. I'm lucky that I am the age I am and all that. But I once was that young person who wasn't able to accept herself because she didn't have the privileges she does now. So I know what it's like to be in those shoes. I have been there. It's probably a big reason that I waited till a bit later in life to finally confront and accept these things about myself.
And, do you think that if you had more familial support and different types of support in place when you were younger, do you think that this would have made the transition easier for you? Do you think that maybe you would have transitioned a little earlier in life, possibly?
I don't know about earlier because I feel like sometimes I curse myself for not doing this sooner after I've realized it's made me so happy, which is something that I've written about in my music for sure. Is like when I came out, it was such a ridiculous increase in my quality of life and my happiness. It was insane that it almost brought on kind of a grief for how long I had spent not being myself, all the time that I felt that I had lost and all the experiences I had missed out on not allowing myself to be myself. So it's easy to get caught up in that kind of regret, but also I do feel like, it could have been internal, but I'm sure for sure external factors like the support I had in the place I grew up in, et cetera, did delay me. But the truth remains that I did it when I was ready to. Maybe I would have been ready earlier if I had felt like it was even an option, because for a long time it did not feel that way. But, you can't control those things. I will say for other people that are struggling in their own right, I know that it can be extremely limiting for especially young people to try to express themselves when they don't have the privilege of their own independence. And yeah, I unfortunately do know other younger LGBTQ youth that are struggling with that right now, not as a hypothetical, but as a reality.
Yeah, one of the things for me is finding out. I'm an older guy. I'm Generation X, so I'm. It's one of those newer things to me that I didn't realize that in retrospect. I'm pretty sure quite a few people that I did know back in high school, back when even being gay wasn't really accepted, how many people must have been struggling with that on top of all the other teenage nonsense that you have to deal with. And that just kind of made me feel retrospectively so sorry for so many people who didn't feel comfortable or accepted enough to be able to kind of be who they were, and just having that as an additional struggle to everything else they had to be dealing with. I can't even imagine. So, I mean, I'm glad to see that things are going in this direction, because it feels like at the very least there's a sort of loving support about it society-wise in American culture.
Yeah, I mean, we are seeing more anti-trans bills being argued about in Senates and Congresses and state and federal governments, and I don't know, maybe ever before right now. But I think that the massive amount of hatred that we're seeing legally is backlash. It is because transgender people are starting to get more of a voice and more of an acceptance, and there are people in positions of power that are now having to actually reckon with the idea that we could have rights and we could have a social presence and live good lives openly. A lot of those people in power haven't had to reckon with that before. So although it's unfortunate the way things are being fought over right now, I think it's a sign of the previous unacceptable status quo being challenged. It's a sign of progress to have backlash.
Right. And, for me, I think the idea that most of the people who are trying to tell other people how they need to live their lives are usually the people that have no business doing it in the first place. It's almost like they have nothing else to do other than meddle in other people's lives, and it drives me crazy, because it's like I have a very basic rule of life that I stole from George Carlin, which is, are you physically hurting somebody else, or are you causing life to be unexceptionally more difficult for somebody else through your actions? And if you aren't doing those things, no one should care. It's like, just let them do what they're going to do. If they're not harming you, who cares? And so, but I mean, I think that you guys I think it's good to see that you're getting, you guys, I'm tripping all over my words.
It's good.
Holy shit, I got to redo my vocabulary. But I think it's great that you're getting support in the music community, because I feel like that's probably one of the best places in the art community in general. Is always going to be one of the best places to really get support for so many, for lack of a better phrase, out of the box ways of living and thinking for people. And, with your music in Juniper Willow, I think that that's great that you have that to use. And so with that going forward, you have released a record today. I'm sorry. Again, using old terminology, you used a record, but I'm assuming, is it digitally released, or are you going to have a physical release for it?
I'm going digital to start. I'm announcing it today. It'll release on the 17th. Yeah.
Okay. And is there, are there plans for shows behind this?
I played a big run of shows, and now I'm kind of working things together. The other band I'm in, Machine 13, is starting to play more, and I'm submitting some things to get some more shows played, but I don't have anything on the books right now. There's kind of a lot of things at play at the moment. Also, in my photography and personal life, I just left like a 40-hour a week like day job to go do a part-time job. I just founded an LLC for my photography. I just released the 6th volume of a zine, so I've got a lot of moving parts for sure. So the EP is definitely one of many things that I'm kind of managing in my schedule right now. So hopefully it gets the attention it deserves when I can. Hopefully I get to it.
I know. Well, good luck with that. If you ever end up having a family, you'll really not have time for that. So, yeah.
God forbid.
Oh, man. I tell you what, it's something. Well, okay. So how many songs are on? You said it's an EP. So is it about 5 or 6 songs?
Yeah, 5 tracks, almost 18 minutes. Yeah, and it's a pretty solid and consistent. It's pulling from like history of techno and electronic dance music. So the entire of the EP, with respect to that history that I'm pulling from, is 120 BPM, all for the floor. Every track runs right into the next. So it's kind of like a one consistent long DJ dance experience with little to no break. It's kind of meant to go seamlessly.
Okay. I kind of like stuff like that. I love the band Sleep, their album Dope Smoker. It's like an hour and 5 minutes long.
Yeah, a lot of post rock is that way. Yeah.
I think that's awesome because for some reason I think it's just because my life is so busy and I tend to listen to things a little more passively. So if it's really sort of a long piece of music, strangely enough, I get into that more than I do little short pieces when I'm working or something. So this might be right up my alley. I will definitely check it out today because I did not have a chance before we talked. Where can people find it? I mean, is it on like iTunes, Spotify, and all that kind of stuff, or is the best place like a personal website that you have?
It's basically on everything. I use DistroKid for my distribution. It's an online distribution service that kind of gets it on everything. I have a single from the EP already out called Chemical. It's the 3rd track, the middle of the EP, and I thought it was maybe the most unique one I made, so I decided to put it out there for that reason if I'm trying to introduce my sound. And it is just like the single, yeah, it'll be out on everything, Spotify, iTunes, Tidal, whatever. I guess it's best to just go ahead and find it wherever is best for you, wherever you normally listen to things. However, I do have a website at www.geddimonroe.com. That's GEDDIMONROE. And that's where I keep everything that I do. The zines that I put out, the photography that I do, an entire archive of every single show I've ever shot over the last several years since I started doing the live music, the fine art that I used to do in college, and I'm soon updating it with all of my music as well. So that if you just want to go look at everything I do after this conversation, that's definitely the place to go.
Okay. I know. Well, I've been on there before, and I think some of my favorite pictures that you have taken are of a few basement shows that you've been a part of.
Oh, yeah. Those are mine, too. Those are my favorites as well, yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, because there's something just unhinged about a basement show that I can't really explain. It's something like going to a club, it's sort of a formal atmosphere, but a basement show is just chaos. And it's one of those things that it's like, oh yeah, if you remember it, that's awesome. But if you weren't there, you just won't. Nothing can describe it. I mean, your pictures are great, but it's like there's got to be some part of you that is just like, yeah, I'm here smelling this basement. You're a part of it.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, if you're listening to this and you're not someone who's like frequented. That's a tough word. DIY shows and all that. And by DIY, I don't just mean like. Yeah, you can go to smaller venues that host DIY acts like Fleetwood's and 27 Club and Static Age, Auditorium, whatever, all these places I do love. And yeah, you're definitely getting a taste of it there. But the shows that a lot of, especially young people, will put on that are just house shows, I think that those are the ones I've truly, truly fallen in love with. To me, it's kind of an unbridled, uncensored, unabashed subculture taking its precious breaths when it gets to, this is me being a little bit political, but for me personally, I think that DIY music isn't just something that you do because you're not signed to a label or whatever. The act of a bunch of young people having, instead of top-down distribution of art and music, a bottom-up support to create spaces where art and music can happen, to support each other, to kind of find something common all amongst each other, is a very powerful thing that can kind of exist outside of the throes and the grips of capitalism. I don't have to go on Spotify and see what the top 100 playlist is, or go to the Greensboro Coliseum and stand around thousands of other people. Those experiences can be enjoyable, but the idea that not only can your friend or you, as the Minutemen said, our band could be your life. This could be you going up there and getting on stage and making music, or not even on stage, standing on the same level of ground as the rest of the audience. So it's not like I'm up here and you're down there. That's something that Jeff Rosenstock said, kind of echoing Ian MacKaye as well, all punk rockers. It's not like I'm up here and you're down there. It's like we're all together participating in this one big event, and the people in the crowd are just as important as the performers. It all comes together to make this experience, whether it's relaxed and people are sitting down and it's quiet and there's a special atmosphere, or whether it is intense and people are moshing and slamming into each other and there's booze and all that. It's all a special experience, I think, because everybody comes together to make this beautiful human thing, the thing that's inexorably human, the expression of art and music. And whether you're, consider yourself an artist or not, you're participating in it just by showing up and supporting it. It all comes together in this atmosphere that makes it what it is. And it can't exist without all of those elements. There's just nothing else like it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, some of my favorite shows as I've gotten older is I'd far rather go see a lesser-known band in a smaller venue than a big band in a big venue, because I've done both of those multiple times. And if you want to just talk about in terms of sheer memory and passion, the small shows will always beat the big ones, period. Big ones are fun for majesty, but there's a sort of clinical disconnect that is not there when you go to a show and you can literally have a beer with the guitarist at the bar after the show.
Oh yeah, and I'm totally spoiled too. Like, I used to go to big shows all the time before the pandemic, and I just bought my first major concert tickets since the pandemic. It's been a couple of years now, and I got tickets to go see Death Grips at Rabbit Rabbit. And I was thinking to myself the whole time, like, oh man, these tickets cost like $50 to $100, and like I'm gonna be there with like thousands of other people, and it's gonna be outdoors and be super far from the stage, like rain or shine. Like, everything's expensive. It just seems so much less personal. Mm-hmm. And it's like, when I walk into a DIY venue and I look around, I instantly feel a connection with everyone there, simply for the fact that I know we have something special in common, and a common understanding by the fact that we took our time to go be there and participate in this subculture actively and happily. Whereas whenever I go to a bigger live show, the only thing I might have in common with these other people is they might like, this band I'm going to see, if they're even there for that band,
Yeah, and you have to deal with the drunk Karens who never get out and they're showing their ass, and oh yeah, that drives me nuts. With the commonality, there does seem to be like a code of conduct with everybody where we're all like, no, we all came here to see the same thing, so everybody's cool with each other.
Yeah, and that's another thing that I really respect, DIY spaces like basements and all that, that these basement shows and these house shows, which are definitely my favorite ones to play and shoot. I feel like, again, if you're an outsider looking in, a lot of people have kind of misunderstandings about what current modern day kind of punk culture really entails. It's not necessarily just a bunch of white kids getting together in a basement and like beating the crap out of each other. It's not a bunch of white kids like beating the shit out of each other in a basement. It definitely can be that. Don't get me wrong. There are absolutely corners of punk scenes and DIY music scenes that are like that. And some people don't love that because they consider it inaccessible. And I totally get where they're coming from. But also, the people making the space can kind of make it whatever it is. But on the other side of things, what you most encounter, at least what I most encounter here within the Asheville scene, is that another Jeff Rosenstock quote I'm going to pull. One of the most punk things you can ever do now is just care about each other and be nice to each other. So you have, pit etiquette and all that, where if there is a pit, it happens in this part of the room, and if people don't want to participate in it, they have ample space to go be in another part of the room and still enjoy the show. If people are getting knocked down, you pick them back up. Don't stick your elbows out and go out for blood. There is, pushing and shoving, and there are ethical ways, like any sport, to kind of, enjoy the release and the physical connection of a mosh pit without harming each other. There is such thing as a foul. I appreciate that at most of the shows I've ever been to. I would say all the shows I've ever been to, because I'll make the caveat. I've seen everything stay completely safe and have a good time. And anytime I've seen anybody become uncomfortable, they've had the easy access to enter a space where they do feel more comfortable to get out of the situation they're in, or the person that has been making people uncomfortable has immediately been ruled out. There's not much tolerance for assholes in the scene. So it's very, kind of self-policing and self-regulating, and it's another element that makes me feel close and safe to people.
Yeah, I would agree too. The self-policing in a lot of those shows is just far better than any of the security that might be at a bunch of them. Because I've seen plenty of people who just they don't understand pit etiquette. They go in and they think they're really supposed to be starting a fight, and it's like a 5 or 6 pylon of people grabbing one person and being like, nope. And they don't even hurt them.
Yeah.
It's more like, we're just going to do you and throw your ass that way.
Yeah, and a bunch of punks, like we of course we all have little authority issues, of course. So I'd say a big element of it is that it's so much more impactful and matters so much more when it is part of the community and your fellow people that are next to you, that are still participating in the same subculture just like you. There's no power dynamic whenever people establish etiquette and are keeping each other safe. It feels like the whole room has everyone's best interests in mind, whether it's, trying to help out somebody who's in an uncomfortable situation, or an accident happens, or somebody doesn't understand pit etiquette and is acting out a little too much. It's nice to have that versus, I've been in mosh pits at, say, like the Orange Peel, and a security guard comes and grabs me by the shoulders and yanks me out and is like, all right, you're done. And it's like, yeah, maybe I was going too rough, but damn, now my entire night is ruined because that dude with a badge decided to come in there, and now everybody in the pit is no longer doing anything, and now the whole crowd is just like weird because that happened. Like that's another side effect that I feel like doesn't happen at DIY shows, is when a behavior does genuinely need to be corrected, it's done in a way that's just so easy for even people who are anti-authoritarian to really respect. It feels like it's coming from such a genuine place in a community. And there's room for growth and education and learning too.
And it was good to talk to you again, just the idea that we've been able to kind of more or less touch base through, again, the wonderful thing that is music and our love of music. It's nice that we're able to, kind of stay in touch and maybe run into each other from time to time when we go to Asheville shows and whatnot. So I'm glad you're doing well. It's glad you're happy, and let everybody know where they can go to GeddiMonroe.com and all the platforms. Is there any social media outlets that you want people to go and check out as well?
Yeah, of course. So I guess just to kind of wrap up who I am and what I do and all that, and I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you so much for having me, Dave. It's really good to hear from you again. Lots happened since we last met in person.
Right.
Yeah, I am Geddi Monroe. I am in a band called Machine 13. You can find us at machine13music.com. We also have a social media page, Machine 13, on Instagram. We make industrial electronic music, and we're getting back to being active as a live band starting in April. I perform as Juniper Willow. If you like acts like Atari Teenage Riot, Death Grips, and Crystal Castles, and you like 4 on the floor electronic dance music, you can find my work. I've got an EP, self-titled EP, coming out March 17th. And in my personal life, I am a photographer of the Asheville DIY and independent music punk scene. I'm in the slow season right now, but things are starting to ramp up. I've got bookings for March, and I am a real person that you can hire. I am now a business as a LLC, Geddi Monroe Photography and Art. And you can find archives of all my work at www.geddimonroe.com. That's GEDDIMONROE. So even if you're not a local or anything like that, and you just want to get an idea of the Asheville scene, there's over 300 shows that I've filmed and or photographed that I've gone ahead and posted there for you to pull through just in the last few years. I guess the last thing I'll promote is I also do a zine. If you don't know what a zine is an old Americana punk tradition starting in the 80s. Maybe not that old for some people listening or recording. Where just like musicians could get together and self-release their own cassettes and that kind of technology, put music distribution back in the hands of young, angry punks. People have been making print zines, these booklets of art and photography and writing and poetry together about, punk and independent music or just independent art in general. I have a zine that I put out every 3 or 4 months called Shape of the Crowd, because it's focused on what I was talking about earlier, everybody coming together as one big group that makes the experience of DIY music. And it's available for order. I do it completely for free besides shipping, and even that's not required. I just really ask that you help me out there because it's expensive. If you want to donate to it to help it keep going, then you can. And volume 6 just came out, and the next one will probably be out in about May or June. So thank you so much for having me on. It's that zine is all live music photography, by the way. I should probably mention what it is.
Oh yeah. Well, that's and I highly recommend everybody go and check out your website and pick up the zine, because the pictures are just extraordinary. You've done an amazing job, and the fact that you've managed to get all those shows and pictures in within just a couple of years, I mean, that's pretty extraordinary. That's like workhorse ethic. So good for you.
Yeah, I hope I don't slow down or get burnt out as I get older. I hope I have the strength to keep doing this till volume like 50,
Oh yeah. You love it, so I'm sure you will. Although I speak from experience, the energy will diminish, but it won't go away.
All right, well that's all I need. To plug one of my friends, Chuck St. Laurent. Chuck St. Laurent is legitimately my most respected photographer working in the Asheville DIY scene. Sorry to all the other amazing photographers, but Chuck St. Laurent is, I believe, in his 70s, and that dude is not above going to places like Fleetwood's and the Mothlight back in the day and house shows to take photos just out of the pure love of it. Dude's amazing. So hopefully we can all end up like Chuck St. Laurent.
Do it for this episode of the Piedmont Triad Podcast. Make sure you go and check us out on Facebook, Piedmont Triad Podcast, Instagram at Piedmont Podcast, and also make sure you go and check out our new website, PiedmontTriadPodcast.com, where we're going to have all of our episodes ready and available for you to listen to. Also, big thanks to Matt Smith and the Cowboy Spankers again for letting us use their tune Not Tonight as our theme music. A big thanks to my friend and artist, Brian Falk, who continues to give us great, awesome logo artwork. And a big thanks to you for listening. Make sure you go and check out the PiedmontTriadPodcast.com for any past episodes that you may have missed. Until next time, Piedmont.
Well, maybe I should keep on moving. You're like the devil when the sun goes down. Stay away from me. Well, I'm too far gone. There ain't nothing here to see, babe. So you best just move along.